I don't know, did they miss a trick not calling it Fantasy-orama? Disenchantment, Matt Groening's latest animated series, debuted on Netflix, and I thought to myself, well, I'll check out an episode, see what I think, and then several hours later, I watched the entire first season in one day. So, yeah, it certainly goes down easily, I'll give it that. It's only 10 episodes long, and they're short episodes. They're half hour, I mean, not even a half hour, I think they're 20-some-odd minute episodes. So, yeah, it's pretty quick to get through. So, what are my thoughts on it? It's a real good start, is what it is. It reminds me in many ways of the first season of Futurama, and I'll be making more than a couple of Futurama comparisons. But when I say that, what I mean is in terms of sort of getting the obvious jokes and obvious stories kind of out of the way. Because as much as I like Futurama, and I do like that first season, you go back and watch it, most of the really obvious stuff, like the stuff that almost feels obligatory if you're doing a future set sci-fi comedy thing, they're mostly in the first season. So that it feels, looking back on it in a lot of ways, like the first season of Futurama was clearing the deck of the obvious stuff so that it's done, and then they can go to weirder and stranger places. And this has that same feel to it. And it also means, as a result, that it's not quite as far out there as I'm hoping the show will eventually get. It's also, I don't want to say it's not as clever as Futurama. It might be not quite as learned, because one of the things about Futurama was because they had a crap ton of like science and math majors on the writing staff, and because it was a sci-fi show, there were a lot of deep cut science and math jokes in that, and you know, entire stories like the Farnsworth paradox built around these bizarre concepts and insane mathematical equations that they got. I mean, they invented, there's now a Futurama theorem because of something they did in one of their episodes. I think that was The Prisoner of Benda was that one. But it's sort of that level of intellect isn't quite on display here, and I suspect it's just because the setting doesn't allow for it as much. But most of the rest is still present. It has the same age range for an audience as well. This isn't really for kids. Again, I would make the comparison to Futurama. There is a fair amount of alcohol and drug-related humor. There is a fair amount of alluded to sexual activity, not a lot explicitly shown. And there's a lot of death humor. There's a lot of really dark death humor. But it is all pretty funny. As far as characters go, we've got basically our three primary characters. Our main character is a princess named Tia Beanie, or Bean is what most of them call her. And she is, I was going to say she's kind of your typical rebellious princess, but she's not quite, and I'll explain that in a bit. But the other ones, we have Elfo, who's an elf. Yes, they do address how on the nose that is. And he has voluntarily left sort of the magical hidden kingdom of the elves because he was bored with how happy everything was all the time. And he goes out into the world because he wants to experience more nuance. He actually wants to experience sadness and other things, and he's getting plenty of it. So he's just this little diminutive guy who doesn't really know what's going on and gets kicked around a lot. And then there is a small sort of shadow demon kind of guy that very unconvincingly passes himself off as a cat, who is kind of bonded with Bean because she's cursed with him, and his name's Lucy. And I like Lucy a lot. So Lucy is very much the devil on Bean's shoulders. He's always like whispering in her ear, do it. He's that kind of guy, but he's got a little more personality than that, and he's fun. He's quite enjoyable. I think I like him best out of these core three. I do like Bean quite a bit though. Elfo is usually good. When the focus is on him a bit more, he can be a bit grating. Like, imagine if Ralph Wiggum was a bit of a more central character, and you kind of go, oh, yeah, that might be too much of you. It's not quite at that level, but that was sort of the best comparison I could come up with off the top of my head. Now, coming back to Bean, I said she is a little bit different from your typical rebellious princess, and that's kind of true, because most stories of rebellious princesses that I can think of that happen in mainstream medium, I mean, I can't help but default to Disney, but Little Mermaid, Aladdin, Tangled, those have varying degrees of rebellious princesses, but we're seeing them at the start of their being actively rebellious, like first breaking free. Bean has been very clearly pulling this for a while. So we didn't get what I thought, based off the trailers what I thought it was going to be was like, she breaks free out of this confined life and goes and starts to experience all this stuff in the world for the first time. It's like, no, she's kind of been doing this for a while. She does still have the confined life, but she sneaks out like almost every night and gets drunk and starts fights, and she is a rowdy person and is already established to be. We're not seeing the origins of this, like, nope, this is her standard routine at this point, which I think is kind of cool and it's kind of fun. As far as some of the supporting and I'll also note that none of those three are any of sort of the recurring Groening voice cast. We do get some voice actors, mainly from Futurama, on this, but they're not any of the main three, which is good, I think, because the most prominent of the voice cast from Futurama in the supporting characters is the King, who is voiced by John DiMaggio, and I actually, the voice of Bender, and I actually find him really distracting as far as his voice goes, because it's not the same as Bender, but it's a very stock John DiMaggio voice. It's one of like a handful of one. I'm not saying these are the only voices he can do, but it's a handful of ones that are very standard to him. So I caught it immediately that it was him, and it does kind of pull me out a little bit. And not that I'm saying you can't go with, a king in a medieval kind of place talking like this, but knowing who it is, and maybe if you don't watch as much animation, maybe it's not as distracting. For me, I found it really distracting. And it's not even a bad performance, but that didn't quite work for me. You've also got, like Maurice LaMarche shows up as kind of a vizier type character, which works. It's like, imagine if Kif Kroker had backstabbing ambitions. There you go. And Tress MacNeille is all over the place as, your old women, a witch, a cranky fairy, and things like that. So you'll catch those voices if you're a Futurama fan. But like I said, thankfully it's not the main three, which again I think is a good call, because I think that would have been really distracting. So as far as the progression of the thing overall, I am going to get into some spoilers towards the end of the season on a couple things, but I'll warn you before I get there. So the way the season kind of progresses is interesting, because it took me a while to realize that it was actually building a continuous story. Most of the episodes feel, if not 100% self-contained, they only feel like slightly following on something that was set up in the last one. Not in a to-be-continued way, but in a, that's the nugget we're going to build a new episode from in the next one. Just sort of very loose connectivity. Because by and large, most episodes feel like they kind of reset to zero again. We start each new episode with being out and being rowdy, and the king being grumpy at her, and that's sort of the standard starting point. And what I realized as the show went on is that it had actually been laying a fairly significant amount of groundwork for stuff that was going to be pulled together later for the last couple of episodes. And I would say it actually does it better than a lot of shows that sort of take this stuff more seriously. Like, look, I love Doctor Who, but I hate the way Doctor Who has done most of its quote-unquote season arcs, which is to just continually drop a name of something that we don't know what it is, and then finally explain it at the end, like they did with Bad Wolf and with Torchwood and with the name Harold Saxon, and with the cracks in time. These things we keep seeing, and we don't find out what it is until the very end. What Disenchantment does instead is we have something that is in an episode, plays its role in the episode, gets used, and you're like, oh, okay. But then ends up coming back later, along with a few other things from a few other episodes, and you realize, oh, they built a lot of foundation back there without me noticing. Nice work. I think that's what makes it kind of more impressive that way, is because they weren't signposting the stuff that was going to come back, which was just kind of nice, and kind of it had a respect for the intelligence of the audience that I guess I don't always realize how much that's lacking until I see a show that actually expects a little bit more out of its audience in terms of connecting the dots. So well done there. Again, I don't want to oversell it, because overall there weren't a ton of gut-busting moments for me as far as the humor goes, but it was all pretty good. Very few things landed with a thud. And I'm still getting my investment into the character, so it's not quite bringing the heavier emotional stuff out of me, which, again, to make the Futurama comparison, the real heavy emotional Futurama episodes, of which there are quite a few and they are excellent, don't really start hitting until like maybe season 3 and onward. First couple of seasons is just getting to know these folks, and that's the same here. I'm going to talk about a couple of things that I actually have a little bit more issue with, but they're kind of spoilery. So my overall thing is, go check it out. It's a low time investment. You'll know in the first 3 or 4 episodes if you're enjoying it, and if it's just it's okay, just go on through to the end. I think it's worth it for that, and I'm looking forward to a second season. So getting into spoilers, there's 2 things that I didn't particularly care for. The first has to do with Elfo, which is Elfo develops a crush on Bean, and I don't like that for a number of reasons. It just feels very forced. It feels like an attempt to recreate the Fry Leela dynamic, in terms of the guy who has no chance with this girl, and she just sees him as a friend, and obviously that developed over a fair amount of time on Futurama into something else, but the one thing I'll say is that it is a little bit fresher here, in that it feels like we're getting it from the other side, because Futurama was primarily from Fry's perspective, and we were sympathizing with him, whereas Disenchantment is primarily from Bean's perspective, and we sort of get a bit more of the sense of, oh, Elfo, you're cute, but you're annoying. And we're not being asked to feel bad for him because she doesn't want to be with him, to the same way that we kind of were with Fry. So, I mean, that freshens it up a little bit, but it just strikes me as highly unnecessary, especially within the first season. I mean, it is important to have them connect and have them be friends, but I don't think it was necessary for him to actually develop a crush on her. Yeah, I think it was just a step too far and wasn't necessary. I mean, we'll see where it goes ultimately, but I would much rather have seen a dynamic of them just being great friends, personally. The other thing that was a little bit iffy is at the very end in the last episode, stuff that goes on with Bean's mother. So if you're watching this and you don't care about spoilers, but you didn't watch the show, Bean's mother was presumed dead through pretty much the whole season, until at the very end we find out that this statue that we had assumed was a monument for her is in fact her mother turned to stone. And Bean has the chance, Elfo dies, Bean has the chance to either resurrect Elfo or bring back her mother, and she had been turned to stone because she had been hit with a poison intended for the king, and Bean chooses to bring back her mother. Now that choice in and of itself, cool. I love the tension of that, and I think it's very sympathetic, the choice that she made. But also understanding why it was a hard choice for her to make. I like all of that. But then I would say within 2 minutes of the mother being back, I was like, she's going to turn out to be evil. And then like another minute after that, I'm going to be like, that poison that was meant for the king, she did that. And then she drank from the wrong cup. And I was right. And I don't know. It just felt, I don't want to say it was predictable, but it felt over-telegraphed. It really felt like that was a part where the respect for the intelligence of the audience felt like it pulled back a little bit, because they over-hinted at this, I think, at least for me. If it caught other viewers off guard, I'd kind of like to hear about that, but I feel like it's within a couple minutes of her being resurrected, I call pretty much the entire rest of it. I do find the place that it ends to be pretty interesting because this is a serious status quo shakeup, and where it's going to start next season can't be where it ended. So I will be super curious about where things go from here. But yeah, those are really kind of my only two major notes. Other than that, it was good. It was solid, and, not phenomenal, but I think a lot of really good, strong groundwork that could turn into something special in another season or two. So I'm certainly going to be keeping my eye on it, and as I said, I recommend people check it out. So Disenchantment Season 1, have you seen it? What do you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. There's all the stuff to do, and you know what it is, and you don't need me to tell you, but there's links for all of it down in the description, and there's buttons. Feel free to click some of them. I have a Patreon. I'll single that out. But other than that, check it out if you care. And remember, folks, you are the council. I just run the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned.